the Spirit in Mind broadcast with your hosts, Bishop C. Guy Robinson and Dr. Jonathan Shepard, where we explore faith and mental health perspectives on current affairs. Let's get into today's discussion with the Spirit in Mind.
Well, great day, everyone, and welcome to Spirit in Mind, where we discuss current events with faith and mental health perspectives. I'm Bishop Guy Robinson, and I count it a blessing, as always, to be able to spend this time with our Spirit in Mind family, and grateful for Dr. Shepard. Good day, Dr. Shepard.
Yes, good day, Bishop.
How has everything been for you this week?
Things have been okay for me, up and down, traveling back and forth to a conference, and but thankful for travel mercies. And it's been a tough week, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that as we move further into this broadcast. But for all of you out there, I know this has been a difficult week for many of you all because of the events that have occurred over the last couple of weeks. But Bishop, I am here, and I am ready for our show.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, we welcome our Spirit in Mind family. And so glad you're with us. We really are hoping you'll be a part of this conversation today. So we want to encourage you to let persons know, and feel free to share. You can join us in sharing this time of discussion, and letting people know, again, that it's time for Spirit in Mind. We're going to be talking about some things that we believe on certainly, again, in the thoughts and prayers of our nation and even our world. And so we'll be talking about that just by way of, for the sake of being thorough, in case there are any persons who are watching and joining us for the first time. We appreciate the power of connection. And so we do want to share a little bit about our means of staying connected and getting updates. And we've got some other exciting things that are happening, as Spirit in Mind will be expanding in our formats in the very near future. So Dr. Shepard, if you are okay with it, would you share how people can stay connected with us?
Absolutely. So I want you all to know that we do stay connected with you all through various platforms. You can email me at my Gmail address, jshep2471@gmail.com. If you're in need of direct care services, that means you're in need of mental health services, you can reach me at my office, Hope Health Systems, 410-265-8737. Or like many other people, they go to my website, drjonathanshepard.com, or to my social media platforms. You can reach out that way. If you have questions, or if you're in need of help, we'll do our best to assist you with that. Then you can also reach out to Bishop C. Guy Robinson. You can reach out to his email address, Gmail address, C. Guy Robinson Ministries, and the office number there to the church, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You see the various handles there. And I always like to promote that Bishop is the pastor, the senior pastor of the Tabernacle of the Lord Church, and you can always reach out to him even through YouTube and listen to the wonderful sermons that he has listed there, uploaded there. And I know that they will bless you. He even has material that he has written, and you can also find copies of those at his website. So please reach out to us. We love it. Thank you for all those who are out there. Greetings, Principal Carlidian Thompson. Glad to see you. Sarita Watson, thank you. Miss you also. Juanita Henderson, Jacqueline Shaw, Sandra McCrae. Go ahead, if you're watching right now, drop your name in the comments section so that we can greet you. Thank you, Laverne Jones, and we'll gladly reach out to you and just say hello. And I'll do my best as we're talking to send a little message just to let you know that we are appreciative of you. Also, please like and share. Go ahead and let people know that this particular broadcast is on. We're on live, and we're thankful for this opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. I echo everything Dr. Shepard just shared, and we are grateful for the power of connection. And so without further ado, we've been talking about, for the last several weeks, post-traumatic growth. As you know, there's post-traumatic stress, and then there's post-traumatic growth. And today, kind of wanted to really kind of insert a subject that is really related, because we are living, it can be argued that we're living in a season, an age even, some would say, of multiple emotional triggers, and even traumatic experiences and shared trauma. And we're watching things unfold in real time, and virtually in those spaces and places. And then we're empathizing because we're human beings. And though we are not literally going through that moment, we can imagine and put ourselves in that place, and we feel some kind of empathy on a humanistic level. So there's so many triggers and so many things that are going on, literally from the international level to the national to the local. Internationally, even while we've been talking about post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth, of course, there was a situation in the Ukraine, and some are saying and how that impacts us in terms of supply chains and inflation, that some are attributing and connecting to all of those events. And so it's really a powerful example in some ways of the butterfly effect, if you will, that what's happening in another part of the world is influencing some things that we are experiencing. Then you add to that, to the inflation and to the gas prices, and to the international war level and things that are happening. And then you add to that just earlier this month. And Dr. Shepard, I was thinking, isn't it amazing that this is Mental Health Awareness Month? Mm-hmm. And Mental Health Awareness Month, we've had these traumatic events, Buffalo, New York, which is a mass shooting, and not only a mass shooting, but a racially motivated one. Now, there's two subjects. There's trauma, and then there's race-based trauma. Yes. And so we have that. And then 10 days later in Uvalde, Texas, we have another mass shooting. And it just seems that these things are recurring. And we've been watching persons talk about it because it is very emotional. And those of us, we can identify with parents and imagine being targeted for the color of your skin. It raises all of these kinds of moments of deep emotional shared trauma. And we've been talking about what to do about it. And some of the social media posts, Dr. Shepard, we'll talk about this. I want to get your insight on this. I was looking at some posts that kind of, one of them was a chart, and it's an infinity cycle, really, and talking about how, and maybe it speaks to some of the sense of cynicism or hopelessness. This image is circulating on social media. And you see the mass shooting, thoughts and prayers, Facebook debates, everyone forgets, Congress does nothing, crickets chirping, mass shooting. You see the American flag there, making a comment that that is an American phenomenon. And then you see the infinity circle there, used a lot in marriage and family therapy and emotionally focused therapy examples. But that infinity circle and the feedback loop is so powerful there. And if that is the idea, then it kind of speaks to thank you, Minister Cat, our engineer. If that is the idea, then it kind of speaks to a kind of despair. And can we break this cycle? Can we break this negative infinity loop? Can we move from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth? How do we grow from this? And that's some of the things we want to talk about. And we welcome your insight. We welcome your comments in the chat line, because they help to keep the conversation going. And we just wanted to spend some time as we talk about post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth. We wanted to talk about these traumatic events that are happening now, and where do we go from here, or perhaps more poignantly, where do we grow from here? And so, Dr. Shepard, please help us out here.
Yeah, Bishop, thank you for that great introduction. I just want to say publicly, I already mentioned it in the chat, Principal Carlinian Thompson, who was here She's a principal. I forget the name of the school. It's right on the tip of my tongue, but right there in West Baltimore, Bishop. We're actually not too far from your school. I'm from your church. I'm sorry, her school's not that far from your church, and she, as I meant, I'm sure she'll put it in the chat. Just if you don't mind, put it in the chat if you would, Carlinian Thompson. But there are so many educators who were affected
Mhm.
by the Texas. There we go. Robert W. Coleman Elementary School. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah. She's the principal of that school, Bishop.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. And sister of Bishop um, William McMillan. Uh,
Yes,
yep.
certainly.
Yep. So that's who that is commenting. And so we know that many people are affected, um, educators,
Yeah.
teachers, those who are teachers, aides, parents, all alike have been affected by this, by the mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And then, of course, our hearts go out to those who are in Buffalo. And in particular, Bishop, you may be aware, may not be aware, that three of the persons killed were a part of the Kojic denomination.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and that in itself was a huge loss. Any life taken in the way in which it was. So I just wanted to mention those things because we hear you, we understand. Um, where my mind goes right now is a couple places, and this is where I'll start. We have to understand that there's a difference between mental health disorders and evil in the land.
Yes.
Um, what we'll hear, and this really does pertain to post traumatic growth, is what you'll hear from people is try to explain something in regards to the shooters as to why they did what they did. People keep trying to say, well, he had this, or he did this, or if it was a woman, she did this. And honestly, I want to let you all know that some things just cannot be explained. Um, we may never know the reason why. Um, Now, yes, was it racially motivated? Absolutely. Um, but why did he choose that particular place? We may not ever know why. And we have to understand that mental illness, mental health disorders are one of the reasons that people will utilize in order for them to set the foundation for that person not being prosecuted or even executed when it comes to a trial or jury of your peers. Um, yeah, it's quite interesting how that flows in this particular land that we live in.
Yeah.
Um, it really is. I can say so much more on that, but I'm gonna pull
You,
back from
you
that.
you hit something good, Dr. Shepard. I think that's so critical, and I think that's one of the things that blesses me about Spirit and Mind and the vision that we believe was inspired of the Lord is that we get to talk about both spiritual and mental health matters because they are really we study them separately. I understand that in the disciplines for our learning, but when we look at the scriptures, they're interactive. Bible, as we said before, compares soul and spirit to bone and marrow. It's hard to touch one without touching the other. But certainly, I really appreciate you making that distinction between mental health and just evil because it begins to enter in the concept of spirituality. Just in an academic sense, of course, as a bishop of the Lord's Church, we have an understanding of what the Holy Spirit is, and Pentecost Sunday is this Sunday. So we can go there. But I also relate because I'm a teacher as well and faculty lecturer at two universities, two HBCUs. And so I can relate to that classroom moment experientially and the vulnerability and really not expecting those kind of things to really be a reality, and yet they are.
Mhm.
And how would you do it? And now coming to class thinking, how do you deal with this? And what would you do if? There's some very real scenarios for me as an educator. And so with that in mind, that concept of an inexplicable moment. When we talk about spirituality in a just strict academic sense, we're talking about spirituality is defined as that which deals with that which is invisible but influential and concerns a sense of meaning and purpose. And whenever we're talking about meaning and purpose and talking about as invisible but influential forces, motivators, if you will, that spiritual dynamic forces, then we're talking about things that move us to act, that are intangible, ideological, spiritual. That's what we're talking about when we're talking in a generic definition of spirituality. We're talking about that which gives purpose and meaning. And what you're saying is so powerful is that those things begin to get into the spiritual meaning and trying when we're searching for meaning and understanding. And so there's not just, I would argue, as a faith leader, there's not just a mental health crisis, because that's very, very true and very much a part of our conversation, but it's a psycho-spiritual problem. Again, because it's so intertwined. And so there is a spiritual reality here. And the scriptures are clear that evil is real. If we don't believe that, then we would have a problem with the scriptures, because Jesus himself said, I beheld Satan. Jesus said, I saw him. Jesus said, I saw him fall. And Jesus said, the scriptures, he comes into the wilderness and begins to have these moments. And the scriptures say, Paul said, we should not be ignorant concerning his schemes or devices. And so these things are very real. It's easier, I would argue, to talk about the mental health aspects in our culture, because mental health has done a tremendous job of remaining neutral in its nomenclature. And so the neutrality of the nomenclature allows it to be discussed by pontificators everywhere in terms of the body and the mind. But 1 Thessalonians 5:23 is very clear that our anthropology is tripartite: spirit, soul, and body. And so if we don't get this spiritual component included in the conversation, and then we'll just be talking about mind and body. And that has its place, but that's only 2/3 of an anthropological whole. And so we kind of want to talk about all of it. We're not dismissing any of it. But if we're going to be holistic in addressing it, then we have to address all of those issues. And that's why I appreciate you talking about the concept of evil into the equation.
Absolutely, because we have to remember that there is a difference between distressed and disordered. So people who are disordered mentally, they're unable to function properly. These are the people who are typically going to be the victims of those who take advantage of them. So mentally disordered people are more commonly than not the victims as opposed to the aggressors. We must remember that. If you're dealing with a mentally disordered person, they're normally the ones who are going to fall prey to someone who will manipulate them, someone that will abuse them, whether it be physically, verbally, or sexually. And if they're going to be aggressive, they normally act on themselves. There's normally an inward struggle within their own selves where they end up maybe hurting themselves or even taking their own life. The data continues to show that. The data has not changed. We must remember that. That's very important as we move forward in seeking some of the answers to some of these crimes and massacres that we have witnessed. Now, distressed people are those who are ones who are in the middle of a issue that has just overwhelmed them. All right. Now, you can be mentally distressed or overwhelmed to where you do act out and do something to actually hurt yourself or someone else. Oh, absolutely. That there's a time and period where you can stay so distressed that if you're not careful, you can be distressed and end up at that destination called disordered. And so, so what are you trying to say, Dr. Shepherd? I'm trying to say to us today that remember those who are mentally disordered, that those are the people who are typically the victims and not the aggressors. All right. That's important to remember. Are there exceptions to the case? Always. There's always exceptions to the case. It's not 100%. But typically, more commonly, and I have to remind people about that because when people see someone who's mentally actually disordered, they think that they may hurt them or they may actually come out and abuse them or do something that's horrible. And typically, that's not the case. It's typically not the case. But when someone is distressed, we don't know what we might do. I don't know if anybody out there has ever been so distressed where you end up doing some things that you're not necessarily disordered. You're still functioning, but you're just so distressed. You just find yourself doing some things that you normally would not do. Right. And that is a possible place to be at, where you're so distressed and where you find yourself to do some things that you may not want to do or end up doing that you had not planned to do. So that's why it's very careful. That's why we have to be very careful what we say about people, and then we must also examine ourselves and see where we're at. So I'll put a pin there. But if we're going to also talk about some things that we can do, Bishop, we've got to make sure that as we move forward, that we're putting people in place in our local, state, and federal governments who understand the difference between mental health disorders and evil. I mean, it just honestly, we've got to do that. And we've got to have people who can stand up and say to those who may not agree with us wholeheartedly, such as the NRA or some of these other lobbyists, let them know you can have your point, but it's not going to supersede what I know and what and what I stand for. I'll say it like this: the data has continued to show that there is no need for common citizens to carry semi-assault rifles. It doesn't. There is no difference. I mean, there is no need for that. There's no need for a person to have an AR-15 at 18 years old, and you're not involved in a war. I'm not getting into the Second Amendment that allows for people to bear arms. I'm not getting into that. But what I am getting into is the fact that there is a need for a restriction. There needs to be background checks. There needs to be some way of checking and putting things in place so that when you get to a point where you're distressed, see what happens is when you become distressed, if you have the wrong tools in your hands, you're liable to use that tool and go off and do some of these things that these people have done. Absolutely. That's why you have to have people who represent you, who can say, and they might not even be, people who look like you. They might be people from where you came from. Then that's okay. But as long as they get it, and as long as you have made your voice clear, we have got to make sure that we stand up as organizations, as faith-based organizations, as people of color, as men and women who are believers, as just human beings. We have to send a message to the people who represent us that this is not acceptable anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are the things that have to be discussed. But you bring up something so powerful when you were talking about you have to have these kinds of conversations about the issues. And we have to be able to do that. And I appreciate the way you put that, Dr. Shepherd, in terms of we may not have the same ideology, but can we possess civility? And so when we're looking at this, several things come to mind for me. One is one is systemically. What does this say about, or can we agree that there needs to be, or that we first, can we agree that we may have a systemic problem? And by that I mean we live in a nation that really is that values individual thinking. So individual thinking is personal responsibility, and you can isolate all of these events. And if you isolate all of these events, there's Columbine in 1999, there's Parkland, there's Charlottesville, there's Orlando just a few years ago in the nightclub there, there's Buffalo. Most recently, those funerals are still happening right now. There's Uvalde, they're being planned, those funerals. And so if you isolate all of them, it's easier to just kind of say, let's move on. That's individual compartmentalized thinking. But as a systems thinker, when you look at it, is there a systemic issue that does this not, I saw an interview that someone from outside of from another nation was doing with one of our U.S. senators, and it asked him, "Why do you have this problem in America? We don't have that like that here, like school shootings." So, are these things separate, or do we have a problem? And then, if we have that, then we have to talk about other motivations. When someone says that they went in a market and started shooting people based on their race, and that they were possibly influenced by replacement theory and other things and racially motivated things, then is that an influence? That's a motivator. Does it tap into something? Does it influence a certain way of thinking? We have to ask ourselves these critical questions. And can you indict one generation when you think systemically without not also indicting another? Is there any correlation between the fact that so many of these aggressors are young adults, persons who in some cases and most recently are not even really able to purchase alcohol, but can purchase firearms? I'm not taking a position, I'm just saying these are the critical questions we have to ask ourselves without the emotional dysregulation. And so is there something there? Is there something there to the fact that people are able to purchase firearms whose perhaps brain aren't even fully developed, and executive functioning isn't even fully operational? Is there some connection? And we have to ask these kind of questions. So can we expect them to really have adult, mature coping skills? And what does the culture of incivility, when we see persons arguing and getting sound bites that insult even in our public officials, and they're modeling incivility and the inability to be bipartisan, as one of our readers said, the inability to do that without insult. And when we live in this insult culture, how much of that influences and models unhealthy interpersonal skills? So do we have any responsibility for that? And if so, what? And what do we need to do differently to break this cycle? They're difficult questions. They're emotionally charged questions. But if we can't engage them with civility and without insult, then that infinity loop that we just saw, that dysfunctional infinity loop, will continue to be a dysfunctional infinity loop.
Yeah, and Principal Thompson just said something that really is key to that, what you were referring to, Bishop, that these gentlemen who did these acts, these recent acts, they had talked about these things prior to actually doing them.
Yes.
So they were not a surprise. That's the scary thing. The one in Buffalo had actually scoped out the top supermarket, had even asked the Caucasian person who worked in the delicatessen area. He asked her, "Why are you working here in such a place where so many Black people go?" and called her an in lover. I mean, it's crazy to think about. And I use that word there sufficiently, because I don't use that word crazy often, but that it fits right there. it really shows us that we must stand up and say something. That's a scary thought, Bishop, that the Uvalde murderer was already called a school shooter before he actually committed the crime. There were people who were already calling him school shooter because they had heard, they had known about these ideas. And what I want to submit to you is that there are other people who you may know, you might be listening to this on this broadcast, wherever it might be heard, and you know other people who may be saying some things that you just don't like. And you might be saying, well, that's just them, or that I won't take it seriously. No, we have to take these things seriously. Um, Number two, out of that, it also scares me that the people who may have heard these things, what stopped them from confronting that particular person or from saying something to the authorities about this person? That bothers me, Bishop. Ooh, that really bothers me. I'm just like, where is that block at? Where is it that we have gotten to the point that we won't say anything when we know that this person is so distressed or disabled that we won't say anything? So that in itself bothers me. Um, yeah. So I thank you for bringing that, because we must say something. We must do something. And again, this is where, teaching comes into play. We've got to do more teaching about mental health issues. We've got to do more teaching about how to advocate for mental wellness within our country. We've got to make sure that our resources are able to be in play for those type of mental health resources to take place. Yeah, Bishop, thank you for saying that, Principal Thompson. That really is something.
It's so these are layered issues. As you said, you got to take things seriously. We got to make some connections. And again, that's where we have to ask ourselves these critical questions. What are the areas of overlap in which we might want to share information? Again, that compartmentalization where, if something happens in the school system, you notice something, and then something happens in another area where that person is, but nobody's communicating, and there's no collective data to kind of connect the dots. And then, as you said, that silence that is sometimes destructive. In organizations, that's called low psychological safety. When no one wants to speak up about things that are going on in the organization for self-preservation purposes. Subsequently, that's how things are broken. Cars are made with defects. Somebody sees something, but they don't say something because that low psychological safety. There's not a culture in which persons feel that if you see something, say something. Kind of way of doing that well. Communication skills, and all of that is layered. And I include I include that part about prayers as well. I'm not taking that out of the equation. I know in our frustration sometimes, you see posts that say tired of thoughts and prayers. I'm not taking that out of the equation. I don't think any person of faith can take that out. We're adding to it, but I think that's still the foundation. The scriptures don't say men should stop praying. The scriptures say men should always pray and not faint. And the effectual, fervent prayer of the righteous availeth much. It may be happening in spiritual realms where we're not aware of, but it can break strongholds. It can break hearts of people who have become recalcitrant and dug in on their positions. What changes a man's heart that was so gung-ho for this way, and then all of a sudden says, now I see? Boom. That's a spiritual matter. And so I just want to encourage us as believers who are watching not to stop praying. Don't cheapen the power of prayer, even as we add the addition of advocacy and action on human levels. But actually, I believe most people who are grammarians will go with me on this because it is grammatically correct. To pray is a verb. Grammatically speaking, it's an action word. And so it does produce effects if we believe the scriptures.
That's right.
Because the scriptures say, availeth much. And so we don't have to disparage the power of prayer. We don't have to disparage the power of the spiritual component of this, even as we add the psychological. We as believers can't fall into the same trap of compartmentalization and competition between things that were really meant to be in collaboration. So we can have faith and mental health. We can have prayer and advocacy. Because as Paul said to the church at Corinth, when we compartmentalize and choose our preferences and put the other down, it really is a sign of spiritual immaturity. The book of 1 Corinthians, Paul writes to the church, I hear that there are some of you who are saying, I prefer Paul. And there's others who are saying, I prefer Apollos. And Paul says that really speaks of your immaturity, because the truth is all things are yours. And you are Christ, and Christ is God's, which means you have access to Apollo's ways of thinking and his academia, and you have Paul's powerful preaching and miracle signs and wonders. You have the library and the prayer closet. You don't have to choose, use them totally. So we're not, I would encourage the church not to allow the wisdom of this world, which is foolishness to God, to take out the power and the efficacy of the intercession and the power of the church. God told Abraham, I'll spare the whole city if I can find just a few righteous folk. And so I still believe that there's power in prayer. We don't have to throw that away, because if we discard that and simply take on what we have achieved by human intellect, we become secular humanists. Man is the measure of all things, and I am, and it's all in me, and it's my power and my might. But no, we're not secular humanists if we're going to be the church. That's a part of it. So we can add the science, and we can add that. We can add the counseling. But it doesn't have to be, or the old adage used to say, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. As he used to say, the effectual fervent prayers of the righteous still have power. And we're adding to that. Prayer gives the strategy. If we just begin doing stuff without spiritual consultation, then there is a way that seemeth right, but the end is destruction. And so we'll end up being busy without strategy, because prayer reveals the strategy, and nobody builds a house who's wise who doesn't first sit down and count up the cost. The prayer room and the prayer of the righteous and the thoughts and prayers is when we begin to think on these things before we act, so that our acting isn't senseless or just cathartic and done by our emotional pressures. So we got to add both, and we got to get mature enough to be able to function and enjoy both. We are beings of spirit, soul, and body. And so that's why we try to do spirit and mind, because it's not either or, it's and both. All things are yours, because you serve the God who has given us all these resources. And so I think it's going to take that kind of collaborative effort. What we teach, what we demonstrate, safety precautions, advocacy on different positions, bipartisan working together is going to take. But what won't work is if we all compartmentalize and go into our silos, and that cycle will continue to go uninterrupted.
Yeah, Bishop, and that's what we're seeing in Congress. They're compartmentalizing every particular issue. I would even submit to you, there's some Republicans who actually do believe in some of the things that are being submitted by their counterparts in the Democratic Party, but because they don't want to be seen as an outlier, People are scared to stand up for things that they really do believe in. And we've seen that continually occurring in our governments, just because they are, or that may be a particular party, and they say, well, I can't do this, or I can't believe that. And it really does weaken our ability to get things done when we stay in our silos. That's what the enemy wants us to do. He wants you to stay in your silo so he can separate, he can isolate you. And that's what even these particular mass shootings do. I want to speak to this too, that those who are affected, which all of us have been affected by it, you must pray, as Bishop was just saying, but don't allow yourself to remain isolated because of these events. Bishop, I've been hearing that those up in Buffalo are scared to go out their houses. They're scared to go to the grocery stores. They don't want to leave home. And that top supermarket was the only supermarket in that area for about 2-3 miles, something like that. It's someone says a food desert. I think someone came behind and said, it can't be a food desert. It's just a desert means I forget how they said it, but it was greater than a food desert. But honestly, they would say it's a systemic issue there. People are just afraid. And what we have to be aware of, yes, these things are very troublesome. My God. I mean, to the point to where it brings tears to your eyes and overwhelms you and dampens your mood and dampens your spirit. But we have to be careful that it doesn't cause us to isolate ourselves from other things and other people to where we now become compartmentalized to where we cannot fulfill truthfully all that we're supposed to be a part of. That's what post-traumatic stress will do. That's how you have post-traumatic growth, is that you have to understand that isolation is something that is keeping you from the growth.
Right.
If you're going to grow, you can't stay in your bubble. You have to break out. So these particular incidents, I get it. They make you not want to go outside. Bishop, there were parents who didn't want to send their children to school this week.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I get it. Who wants to send your child to school not knowing what is about to happen next? I think Janet Rogers mentioned about the need for more training or have a different design within the classroom so there's immediate access to safe areas.
Yes.
Janet, I hear you, but let me tell you, they've been doing it. They said in Uvalde, Texas, they had already practiced what to do when a disaster occurred. Go back and listen to what some of these people were saying. They had already practiced it. The problem is you can practice something, but when it comes time to actually implement it, two different things. That's why you have to continue to practice. That's why even when you're in crises, we must have a prayer life even before we get into crises. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody. I ain't trying to come down on anybody, but it's hard to start praying when you just get into crises. You can definitely do it because I've been there. But if you know that you've been praying and you've been practicing those various skills before the crisis hits, it's a little bit easier to manage through and go through the crisis, because the crisis will come. It certainly will come. But let me tell you, we have to understand that when these crises hit, that we cannot allow ourselves, even we're not directly affected by it, that we don't shut down ourselves. I understand, and that's what today's show really is also speaking to. We want to hopefully liberate some of you all from the heaviness that this week and the weeks prior have brought to you, liberate you from some of that heaviness so that you don't remain isolated. Because when you get isolated, that's when you become more vulnerable to the attack. That's when you become more vulnerable to ideas that are very destructive and harmful to you.
Hey, Dr. Shepard, I want to tag right there. That's because Um, you talked about persons who don't even want to come out of their houses, and what that identifies, and we empathize with that, and we want to highlight that, because what that identifies theologically is now we're beginning. That's why it's called, well, let's go sociologically first. That's why some people refer to these as acts of domestic terrorism. Terrorism means exactly that. It inflicts terror, not just in the immediate event and moment, but after the event, it continues to resonate. And that is what we refer to theologically as, and Paul referred to as, the spirit of fear has now begun. Think about what that means, because we just said spiritual means invisible but influential forces. Just like the Spirit of God is the invisible but influential, active presence and power of God. When the Holy Spirit moves, we see evidence, signs, and wonders. But he himself, Jesus said, is like the wind that blows, no man sees it, but you see the effects of the move of the Spirit. Because when we're dealing with the realm of the spiritual, we're dealing with that which is invisible but active and influential. So he says it's the spirit of fear, the pneuma delia in the Greek. And I can't stay here long, but there's a distinction in Greek between delia and phobia, two different words for fear. The phobia is objectified. It's something you can touch, you can feel. And so it's a fear of a specific object. The delia is the timidity and the anticipation of something that has not happened, but in my mind, I've already begun to conduct myself and go through psychosomatic experiences as if it is happening. And that is the spirit of fear. He didn't say fear, he said the spirit of fear. And so now there's a spirit of fear that continues to grip the culture even after the event. We talked a few weeks ago about a traumatic event, a traumatic experience, and the traumatic effects. The traumatic event can be over, but the experience can still be ruminating in the minds of different people and producing the effect. The effect is the spirit of fear, because now the event is over. The object is no longer there. It's no longer objectified, but it's internalized. And so now it is the spirit of fear. And Paul says God has not given us that. But that doesn't mean we don't experience it. It just means that God didn't give it. and so we have to go through these things. And that's why we're talking about this. And so he says, but he has given us power, love, and a sound mind. Power, this ability to do. And so, and do in spite of, and face that. And so these are some of the things that we can be praying for, because this is the spiritual warfare for a spirit of fear that has gripped now in certain parts. And so we need to be praying about that. We need to be praying about the hearts of our officials. If you look at it on a continuum and not as a compartmentalized event by event, but if we look at it on an arc of a moral universe, like Dr. King talked about, then we have to kind of see that there's some things here that are repeating themselves in a not so healthy way. From Columbine to Parkland to Charlottesville to Mother Emanuel AME Church to Orlando to Buffalo. There is a pattern here, and it does speak of some systemic ills. And so we have to acknowledge that and then begin to go through what we need to do to address that on multiple levels. And so that's going to take spiritual moves. It's going to take psychological moves. It's going to take physical moves. It's going to take protests, but it also takes process, and all of those things are what we're working on. So, Dr. Shepard, that's just what's on my mind.
Yeah.
And so,
I just have one more thing I want to say, and then I think we'll probably just be just about wrapped up. But I just want to speak to every Black person that's out there, and I need to do this because we are living in a day where we are marked people. We really are. We're marked people. And I want to encourage every Black person out there. And I'm specifically saying Black people because there really is no other race within our country that has suffered the likes of what we have suffered. You can't compare us to any other race. Um, the only one that may come close is the American Indians. But even with that, it still is a toss up. I want to encourage every Black person out there that God has us in mind. Well, why are you saying it like that, Shepherd? Because there have been so many different things that have occurred, as Bishop was just quoting the various massacres, the various incidences that have literally traumatized us. Racial trauma is real, you all, and is in full effect. And what I want to tell you is that even in the worst of the racial trauma that you may feel, God still has power over it, and he still sees you as the apple of his eye. You have to be encouraged as a Black person who lives in this country today. You really do. And Spirit and Mind is going to encourage you. I'm going to encourage you. You need to know that God still has you under his wing. He's got you covered. There's no person who's going to eliminate our race. I don't care if we're only 13% of this particular country. God is still in control. He's still omnipotent. He's still omniscient. He still is the one who gives life and who gives the authority. I have to encourage you on that because let me tell you, Bishop, it gets like that sometimes. We wonder, like, God, what did we do to deserve this? I hear you. I hear you. And that's why I need to speak directly to you today to tell you God still loves you, favors you, is not biased against you. And yes, there are people out there who will want to eliminate us. That's just the truth and reality of it. But it won't work. It can't work because God won't let it work. All right. He created us. We are the workmanship. We are his workmanship. We are his people. And we are loved by him. Yes, you may be dehumanized. I know what it is to be dehumanized. And you need to make sure you take care of yourself during this time. Cut the TV off. Lord, that sounds so old. I said, cut the TV off, Bishop. Flip the TV. That was before my time, but I just remember my grandmother saying that. Cut the TV off. But turn off social media. Do those things that is necessary so that you can keep a healthy mindset as you go through it. Thank you for touching on that because there's a spirit of fear, Bishop, that has crept in that will allow you to stay buried and stuck with where you're at. But thank you, Bishop, for reminding us that we've got power, love, and of a sound mind. So I want to speak to every Black person out there. I think I've done that, and I just need to say that for today. With that, I've said what I need to say today.
Listen, I do want to talk to you about self-care a little bit. I came across this just a couple of tips from actually therapy for Black girls, but it does work for us as Black people and as people in general. Some suggestions of self-care when the news is difficult. And Dr. Shepherd may want to elaborate this in the very few moments we have left. But number one, and he just hit on it, that's what brought it to mind: unplug and filter, which means if you need to completely take a break from the news and social media for a minute, do that. It's okay. Put some limits in place. Don't watch videos. Read from sources you trust. I'm an educator, and I know fellow educators, we're always talking to our students about check your sources, cite your sources, make sure they are scholarly reviewed articles or whatever, because just because somebody printed it doesn't mean that it is accurate and that the methodologies are legitimate. And so check your resources and then unplug. Check enough to be aware, but don't meditate on it. Hallelujah. And so unplug and filter. Dr. Shepherd touched right on that. And so I just it brought that to mind. Feel the feels, which means allow yourself to feel it. This is a time that triggers many feelings. Look at our society. It's a time of graduation and a time of grief. People are celebrating in one part of the world and people are grieving in another. Even the school, Rob Elementary School, it's the end of the year. Some people, it's their time to graduate. But for others, this has been a tremendously grievous experience. And so how do you deal with both of those realities at the same time? It's a time of mixed feelings. And so feel that. Number 3, get support. Get support means make plans to spend time with loved ones. There's safety in a multitude of counsel. Talk to people. Have some good confidants that you can confide in. Of course, this particular thing mentions, of course, a therapist, certainly supportive online community. I would add faith community. Now is the time to look, and I believe as the church, we got to seize this opportunity to say that people are hurting and there's healing in the hope of the gospel, and rightly divide the word of truth. The Bible says that God put these places, and he talks about the fivefold ministry, the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, the pastor, teacher. I believe this is a time when we need teaching like never before. It's an age of information and misinformation and disinformation, and we need those of you who've been called to the kingdom to rightly divide the word of truth. Nothing wrong with the celebration, but if God doesn't give you a hoop, don't worry about that. If he gives you insight and revelation to make the word relevant, to transition people's lives in a way that is transformational, teach it in the name of Jesus until lives are changed, because we need the teaching. Get the support. And then lastly, remember that grief is complicated. Because you may think it's crazy. Like, why am I feeling this way watching something that's happening all the way in Buffalo or all the way in Texas? Shared grief is real, and it can send us through some emotions, and we're registering with it. Thank you, Minister Henderson. We're registering with it in different ways. You've got to acknowledge that and talk about it, because there's help and hope. And that's really what we want to leave you with. There's help and hope. So Dr. Shepherd, you just reminded me of that when you started off with saying, cut social media off. And then some of our persons in our family in the chat line caught on to that, and it's in the chat line. Yeah, cut it off. And so that's one of the first steps that came from this list of recommendations. Dr. Shepherd, before we close out.
No, thank you, Bishop, for taking us a little bit further with that. I'll just add on, just to emphasize, there is a blessing of coming together as a whole. So when you're talking about the get support, I've been telling people more and more, there is an energy that when you come together for one common cause, if you're coming together for a worship service, if you're coming together for a meeting, it's different when you come together in person, when you are on a virtual platform. It is just different. And there's an energy that happens when you come together, and it helps you not to be isolated. It helps you to be able to feel the vibe, if you would, from each other, and you glean from that energy. So I know Dr. Hayes mentioned that they were more safe. The schools were in quarantine. I would disagree with you, Dr. Hayes. The children were not safe in quarantine because they were not learning right. These children were not learning, and Principal Thompson would tell you their test scores have gone down during the quarantine because they were not getting that particular interaction that they needed, that so many of our children needed. So there's got to be a way of coming together to be in a safe place. You know, one of the things I appreciated from my pastor even today in worship service, as I watched, she had the people to come down to the altar. She could just feel the heaviness in there. Feel the heaviness in there before she could even move forward in the message. Well, why is that important? Because she said the God is there to meet your needs. We're not here just to have church service. And if needs are not met, let me tell you, it's hard to listen to a word. I'll be honest with you. You come into a place, and you know that you're heavy and you're burdened down, like so many people are. A lot of people are just sad because of all that had gone on. And she just allowed the people just to worship, come to the altar, lay your burdens down. But it was such a safe place where you could come and gather so you can let your thoughts out. We want Spirit and Mind to be that safe place in a virtual space, yes, where you can share what you're thinking, share what you're feeling, so that as you go through what you're going through, yeah, we're here to support you. We're here to let you know that you can make it. We're here to speak life into you, both from a spiritual and an emotional and mental perspective. So thank you, Bishop, for saying that, but never neglect the coming together of people who are like-minded for one purpose, because let me tell you, there is strength in unity.
Absolutely. And that's so powerful. And that's what we're here for. Listen, there's help and hope. I know there's a lot going on, and I know there's a lot of triggers. And again, for some people, this is a celebratory time, and I appreciate our family that wrote that in the line. For some people, you can almost feel guilty about celebrating how God has blessed you. Listen, if God has blessed you, tell of it. Tell of how he's made ways and how he's opened doors. He's helped you get children through school. He's helped you finish school. He's helped you as a teacher, faculty, or staff member get through a difficult semester. Don't be ashamed to tell that, because all of these things are true. That's why we're talking about mixed feelings. All of those are true. Do not hang. If we learn nothing from Psalm 137, it says, Babylon is a bad place, but don't let it make you hang your harp on the willows. Oh my goodness. Don't lose the Lord's song in this strange land. We celebrate, and at the same time we mourn, and at the same time we have to deal with the spirit of fear that has gripped us, but we do it from a place of faith and a place of believing that God is in control, and we do it together. As Dr. Shepard just said, you are not alone. And so we want to encourage you to continue to support, and thank you. I want to thank you, Dr. Shepard, as we close, for mentioning that. Faith family, in your respective houses of worship, give your pastor some liberty to do some things that are unconventional, because these are unconventional times. We got to be open to the Spirit of God moving us around liturgically and changing some things and saying, listen, no, we need to stay right here, or no, we just need to pray today, or no, I don't have 3 points in my sermon, I just got one, but we need to stay right here, and God's going to break some yokes right here and do something. Because even in all of the midst of all of this, those of us who know the Lord know that when things really get rough like this, God is about to show himself mighty and show himself strong. I don't know how he's going to do it. He's hid that from me, but I got enough confidence to believe that sooner or later, he that shall come will come and will not tarry and make his presence known. That's my prayer for you. And we want to invite you to join us by the grace of God as we gather next time on Spirit in Mind.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at Spirit in Mind, and we're also on Instagram at Spirit in Mind Live. Join us next time for a new episode of Spirit in Mind.